He called me useless for not giving him a son. Reborn, he chose my best friend, not knowing. Chapter 1: The Day We Chose Our Futures. The scent of sandalwood lingered in the Hayden mansion, mixing with the faint bitterness of herbal medicine simmering in the background. I remembered this scent too well, how it used to make me feel like I'd finally found a place to belong. But now, as I sat once more on the plush ivory couch in the ornate sitting room, it only made my stomach twist. It was happening again. The day of the Hayden family's marriage selection ceremony. The day that changed the course of my life. Last time, I didn't see it coming. Last time, I was foolish. But not this time. Serena Vale sat beside me, her manicured fingers playing with the diamond-studded clutch she had chosen to carry, expensive, but not hers. I knew it was borrowed. Everything about her was borrowed, her grace, her poise, her ambitions. Even her friendship with me. And yet, I had once called her my sister. "I can't wait to marry into the Haydens with you," she had said that morning, flashing a dazzling smile. Like we always dreamed. I forced a smile and looked ahead at the long mahogany table where the Hayden matriarch and patriarch sat, flanked by their two sons. Lucas Hayden. The golden boy. Eldest son of the Hayden family and next in line to inherit the family's sprawling empire of traditional medicine clinics and research labs. Calm. Charismatic. Every bit the man Serena dreamed of claiming. And beside him sat Damien Hayden, my husband from the past life. The one who had once told me, "Even your daughter is useless. A woman who can't birth a son has no place in my life." He wore the same smug expression now. A touch of arrogance laced his features, as though he already knew he would have me. But what none of them knew was that I had already lived this moment. That I had already been his wife. Already suffered. Already died. As the room quieted, Mrs. Hayden cleared her throat and spoke with practiced grace. "We are grateful to have two such lovely, educated young women. Both of you will soon be part of this family. But tradition allows you to choose your match." Tradition. A beautiful word used to trap me in a loveless marriage in my last life. "We will begin with Serena," Mr. Hayden added, his gaze warm but curious. I turned to look at her, watching the gears turn behind her perfect smile. "Lucas is mine," her voice echoed inside my mind, clear as day. "He's the heir, the future of this family. Aria's too naive to know what she's missing. Let her take Damien and cry about it later." My stomach tightened, but I didn't flinch. "Lucas," Serena announced sweetly, stepping forward and bowing slightly. "I've admired your work for so long. I hope to grow by your side." Lucas gave her a polite smile, and the room erupted in soft claps of approval. All eyes turned to me. Last time, I had hesitated. Thought I didn't deserve better. That maybe Damien would grow to love me. This time? I smiled calmly and walked forward. "I choose no one." Gasps. Confused glances. Then I turned directly to Lucas. "But if I were to marry, I would only consider someone who understands loyalty. Who values truth more than ambition." Serena's smile faltered for just a moment, but she quickly recovered. "And Damien?" He looked at me like I had grown another head. "You dare reject me?" he sneered under his breath, as I passed by him. I paused. Turned to face him. "I didn't reject you, Damien. I just chose freedom." Then I bowed respectfully to Mr. and Mrs. Hayden and said, "Thank you for this opportunity. But I think I'd like to step away from this tradition. At least until I know what I'm really worth." Their expressions flickered between shock and consideration. "But Lucas?" Lucas looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time. As I stepped outside into the crisp spring air, the weight on my chest lifted, just a little. In my past life, Serena had one. She had claimed Lucas. She had children who were showered in praise. And I had been left with nothing. But this life? This time? I was rewriting every page. And as I walked away from the house where my fate had once been sealed, I whispered quietly to myself. Watch closely, Serena. This time, I choose what I become. The perfect wife and the forgotten one. The applause echoed throughout the Hayden estate's grand ballroom as Serena Vale, the radiant wife of Lucas Hayden, was ushered onto the stage alongside her 3 children. Each child, clad in tailored formal wear, stood with polished poise, every inch the image of success and brilliance. A placard beneath the projector screen read, "The future of Hayden medicine." A boy of 10 confidently answered a panelist's question about herbal synergy, while his younger sister demonstrated a perfect pulse diagnosis on a volunteer. The youngest, barely 6, recited the properties of rare herbs with a memory sharp enough to silence the crowd. They were Serena's children. They were the pride of the Hayden family. And they were everything I was told I failed to produce. I sat at the very edge of the room, away from the main tables. Unnoticed. Unimportant. I always knew Serena was destined for greatness, a guest whispered behind me. And her children, truly prodigies. Meanwhile, that other one, what's her name again? Arya? Another voice replied, didn't she only have a daughter? That poor child can't even count past 10. The laugh that followed scraped at the walls of my stomach. But I didn't flinch. Not this time. In my past life, those words would have shattered me. I would have kept my head down, believing that perhaps they were right. That maybe I really was useless, and that my daughter, my sweet, gentle Mira, was doomed to live in my shadow. Because I hadn't birthed a son. Because I hadn't raised a genius. Because I hadn't been Serena. But this life was different. I was different. Damien stood beside Serena on the stage, not out of pride, but obligation. His arms were crossed. His jaw tight. Even now, he couldn't help but glance at me, his wife of 7 years, like I was a stain on the pristine fabric of his legacy. Don't embarrass the family tonight, he had warned me before we left the house. Just smile, clap, and keep Mira quiet. I had nodded. But inside, something had clicked. As the crowd filtered into the banquet hall for dinner, Serena passed by my table. She was luminous in her crimson gown, flanked by reporters and elders. And yet, she paused, only for a second. Her eyes met mine. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The smirk that curled on her lips spoke loud enough. You were always meant to be second best. I stood slowly. Mira tugged on my hand, her dark eyes wide with worry. Mama? Are we going home? I crouched beside her, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Not just yet, sweetheart. But soon. I turned toward the stage where Lucas and Serena now stood, toasting with elegance and ease. Their future was sealed. Praised. Glorified. Mine had just begun. That night, I stepped out into the courtyard, the cool wind brushing against my skin like fate's whisper. Myra's small hand held mine tightly. What's wrong, Mama? She asked softly. I looked down at her, this gentle soul that I had brought into the world. No, she didn't spout medical terms like a parrot. She didn't dazzle with early brilliance. But she loved fiercely. She listened to the wind in the trees and cried when she saw someone hurting. She was mine. And she was perfect. Nothing's wrong, darling, I whispered. But everything's about to change. That night marked a shift in the wind. Serena had her sons, her titles, her applause. Damien had his pride, his contempt, and his ignorance. And I? I had a plan. I had a daughter worth everything. And I had a secret gift, rebirth, with the knowledge of every lie, every betrayal, every hidden truth. In my past life, I was the forgotten one. In this life, I would make them remember. Brainless. The living room lights flickered overhead, cool, sterile, clinical. On the oversized television mounted to the far wall, the national spotlight illuminated the Hayden family once again. Serena Vale's youngest, a boy of 4, stood next to a team of doctors, presenting a solution for an obscure diagnostic problem. The audience on the screen erupted in a standing ovation. Next to me, Damien Hayden grunted, arms crossed, drink in hand. The glass clinked as he took a long, hard sip of bourbon. "You see that?" he muttered, voice low and sharp like a scalpel. "That's what real legacy looks like." I said nothing. My hands lay folded in my lap, fingers clasped tightly around each other, trembling beneath the surface. On the floor beside me, our daughter, Ella, played with wooden puzzle pieces, sun, moon, a crooked smile of a star she couldn't quite fit into place. "Ella," Damien called harshly, jerking his chin at the screen. "Come watch your cousins. Maybe you'll learn something." Ella blinked up at him with wide, unsure eyes. "But Papa, I want to finish the sky." Damien slammed his glass down on the table. "They're making breakthroughs in traditional medicine, and you can't even finish a damn picture." The silence that followed was heavier than thunder. Ella dropped her star-shaped piece. I reached for her instinctively, pulling her into my lap. "She's only 6, I said quietly. "There's still time." "No. There isn't." He stood now, looming over us, drunk on more than just liquor. "She can't even add 1 + 2. What did I get for marrying you? No son. No prodigy. Just nothing." My mouth parted, the words caught on the edge of my tongue, but nothing came out. Because this wasn't new. This was just another night in the same cage. I used to believe I was the problem. That maybe my womb had failed. That maybe my daughter's quiet, inward world was some punishment for something I had done. But sitting there, with Ella's tiny fingers gripping mine like I was her anchor to the earth, I saw things clearly. Damien didn't see Ella. He saw what she wasn't. He didn't love her. He only loved his own reflection in the success of others. And suddenly, I felt it, the burn beneath my ribs. The first spark of something long buried. Not anger. Resolve. "I think you've had enough," I said, standing and holding Ella close to my chest. Damien turned, eyes narrowing. "You don't get to tell me what to do." "No," I interrupted, my voice as calm and sharp as ice. "I don't. But I will decide what's best for my daughter. And that means taking her away from poison." His expression shifted, from arrogance to confusion, then to fury. "You ungrateful little." But I didn't wait to hear the end of his sentence. I walked away. That night, I tucked Ella into bed, her soft voice barely above a whisper. "Did I do something bad, Mama?" My chest tightened. I brushed her hair back, kissed her forehead. "No, baby," I murmured. "You're perfect just the way you are. The world just hasn't caught up to you yet." She smiled faintly and turned to face the wall. I sat in the dark for a long time after that. I no longer needed Serena's spotlight. I no longer needed Damien's approval. What I needed was a way out. A way forward. As I stood beside the window, the stars above the Hayden estate glittered quietly, unaware of the storm beginning to rise beneath their shine. Damien called my daughter brainless. He called me useless. But that was his last mistake. Because I wasn't going to stay invisible. Not anymore. The disappearance. The rain that night came down in sheets, smearing the city lights into ghostly streaks across the windshield. I remember thinking it was strangely fitting that something so brutal could look so beautiful from a distance. I had just returned from the hospital. Ella had come down with a fever, and Damien, of course, hadn't bothered to show. His excuse had been another meeting with a client. But when I reached home, our perfect Hayden estate, I found 2 wine glasses on the kitchen counter. One had lipstick. Not mine. And then, I heard the voices. Soft at first. A giggle. A murmur. And then, his voice, low and intimate. I've waited so long for this, Serena. Once she's gone, I'll make you the real Mrs. Hayden. The world already sees you that way anyway. My chest turned to stone. My hand went cold on the doorknob. Serena laughed softly. She's clinging to nothing. Always second best, Damien. Let's just give her a little nudge. I backed away from the door, nausea crawling up my throat like acid. The betrayal sliced cleaner than any blade. It wasn't just infidelity. It wasn't just betrayal. It was conspiracy. Everything in my marriage, everything I thought I knew about Serena, about Damien, came crashing down in a single moment. And still, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I walked outside, into the rain. I drove. I don't remember where I was going. Maybe nowhere. Maybe just away. But I do remember the truck. Its headlights. The way it swerved. The moment everything went white. They said it was a miracle I survived. That the car flipped 3 times and landed in the river. That I was pulled out, unconscious, bones shattered, but alive. But I didn't wake up in a hospital. I woke up in my bed. In my body. But in the past. The air felt different that morning. The sun warmer. The silence sharper. I opened my eyes to the sound of birds and the familiar scent of spring drifting in from the windows. I reached for my phone, only to find the date, 4 years earlier. The day the Hayden sons were to choose their wives. And I was not yet married to Damien. A chill ran down my spine as memory flooded in, of everything that had been taken from me, all I had endured, all I had lost. But there was something new now. Something burning beneath my skin. I heard the softest echo. A voice not spoken aloud, but thought. I'll make sure she ends up with Damien again. I can't risk Lucas finding her interesting. Serena's voice. Inside my head. I froze. I could hear thoughts. I stood before the mirror, looking into the eyes of the woman they thought they had destroyed. But I was back. And this time, they wouldn't see me coming. Let Serena have Damien. Let her think she's won. Because fate gave me a second chance, not to suffer again. But to rewrite the ending. And this time? I choose who rises, and who falls. The day it all begins, again. The warmth of sunlight filtered through the cream-colored curtains, dust motes dancing lazily in its golden hue. My lashes fluttered. My breath hitched. This was not a hospital bed. This wasn't the sterile, cold air I remembered before the crash. It was my old room. The delicate floral wallpaper. The tiny crack in the ceiling I used to count while crying myself to sleep. The familiar scent of chamomile from the tea my mother used to leave on the nightstand. And then, the date on my phone, April 15th. The day of the Hayden family marriage selections. I bolted upright. My pulse thundered in my ears. "I'm back," I whispered, the words trembling from my lips. Not a dream. Not a cruel illusion. Fate had brought me back, to the very beginning. Memories returned like a flood I couldn't stop. Serena in her ivory dress, eyes sparkling with pride. Lucas Hayden taking her hand, fooled by her practiced sweetness. Damien's bitter sneer as he claimed me like a prize no one wanted. The lies. The betrayal. The humiliation. And worst of all, my daughter, Ella. Sweet, soft-spoken, unloved by the man who fathered her. I clenched the sheets. My nails dug into my palms. Never again. And just as the promise bloomed in my chest, it happened. A whisper. Not aloud, but clear in my mind, like a silk thread drawn tight. This time, I'll marry Lucas again and take everything before Arya realizes what she lost. My eyes widened. Serena. Her voice. In my mind. It wasn't madness. It wasn't déjà vu. I could hear thoughts. I dressed carefully, more refined, more composed than I had been in the past. No more meek smiles. No more letting others decide my fate. When I descended the stairs to the grand ballroom where the selection was to be held, the room was already filled with whispers, fluttering fans, and the air of strategic elegance. Serena stood across the room in pale pink lace, her eyes flitting toward Lucas Hayden, who was speaking with his parents. She turned to me with a practiced smile. "Arya, you look, darling," she said sweetly. But in my head, I heard her true voice. "Good." She still looked so ordinary. No way Lucas would ever notice her. I smiled serenely. "You too, Serena." Radiant, as always. Then Lucas turned toward us. Serena stepped forward immediately, linking her arm with his like it was second nature. "Lucas, this is my cousin Arya. You remember her, right?" I met his gaze directly. For a split second, something flickered in his eyes. Recognition? Curiosity? Serena's inner voice hissed again. "Don't look at her. Don't talk to her." I stepped forward, extending my hand to Lucas. "A pleasure to meet you again, Mr. Hayden," I said, my voice clear. He looked at me, pausing just a beat too long before accepting my hand. "The pleasure's mine." That night, I lay in bed, the echo of Serena's thoughts still ringing like bells. I now understood the truth, not just of her schemes, but of how thoroughly they had manipulated everyone. The Haydens. The marriage. My life. But this time, I held the cards. And I had one advantage no one knew about. Their thoughts. Their lies. Their plans. Serena thought I was still the timid, forgettable girl in her shadow. She thought she'd already won. Let her. Because I wasn't here to play the same game. I was here to burn the board and write new rules. Let her take Damien. Let her play the perfect daughter-in-law again. Because this time, I wouldn't just protect my future. I'd reclaim everything she stole. And when the dust settles, only one of us will still be standing. The hidden spark. The morning of the engagement confirmations, the Hayden estate was buzzing with anticipation. Florists moved through the halls, waitstaff in crisp uniforms laid out fine china, and in the mirror, I saw a reflection that wasn't just mine, it was a woman reborn. I smoothed the deep sapphire silk dress over my waist and tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear. It was time. Let Serena marry Damien. Let her suffer every cold glance, every belittling word. Every night Damien would come home drunk and demand more than I could give. Let her taste the same poison she helped pour down my throat. I had no sympathy left. Because this time, I knew what was coming. And I wasn't the same woman who bowed her head and apologized for breathing too loudly. They called my daughter foolish in my past life. Ella, soft-spoken, shy, often caught staring blankly out the window or trailing off in the middle of a sentence. I remember Damien snarling at her over dinner when she was just 6. How can a child be this slow? She's a disgrace to the Hayden name. Even I had begun to doubt her, then. Until the day I caught her alone in the greenhouse, rearranging flower pots in what I assumed was just childish play. Only when I leaned closer did I realize she was calculating light exposure, soil balance, and growth rates, without writing anything down. She wasn't slow. She was brilliant. But she'd been forced to hide it. And that would be their greatest mistake, again. I walked through the rosewood hallway toward the Hayden parlor where the families were gathering. The moment I entered, eyes turned. Damien's gaze skimmed over me, flickering with confusion. He was standing beside Serena now, their arms just barely brushing. She was laughing, overdoing it, as always. What's she smiling for? Serena's voice hissed in my head. She should be mourning what she's about to lose. I ignored her, walking past them like they were as insignificant as the carpet beneath my feet. Arya, came a voice behind me. I turned. It was Lucas Hayden. His expression was neutral, polite, but his eyes lingered. He noticed the way I didn't flinch when Serena touched Damien's arm. The way I held my head high. He noticed everything. Mr. Hayden, I greeted. He smiled faintly. No need to be formal. You look determined today. Serena's smile froze. Why is he talking to her like that? Why is he looking at her like? Thank you, I replied simply. I have a lot to look forward to. Later, after the announcements were made, Serena paired with Damien, and Lucas curiously delaying his own decision, I stood in the garden, inhaling the cool air. My fingers brushed against the edge of a letter I hadn't yet opened, one that came sealed with a strange emblem. It was from an elite international education institute, offering Ella a place in their accelerated research program. They had seen what no one else did. Just like I finally had. She wasn't broken. She was brilliant. And this time, I'd make sure the world knew it. Let them whisper behind my back. Let them laugh while they still can. Because this time, I won't just take back what was mine. I'll rebuild my name, protect my daughter, and burn down the lies they tried to bury us under. And when the ashes settle, the world will see. The woman they called useless is the one they should have feared all along. The beginning of her fall. The pearls around Serena's neck felt tighter than usual. She tugged at them discreetly as she paced their new home, the east wing of the Hayden estate, the same one Arya once lived in. She had fought for this. Planned every detail of this life. So why did it feel so suffocating? She was supposed to be basking in her triumph. Damien was hers now, legally, socially, in every way that mattered. But ever since the wedding, the charming smile he used to wear had all but vanished. Now, his lips barely curled upward unless guests were watching. And when they weren't, he barely acknowledged her. She bit the inside of her cheek, her heels clicking loudly against the marble floors. He'll warm up to me. He's just stressed. He's always grumpy after meetings. But deep down, she knew. Damien had stopped pretending, because he didn't have to anymore. The evening silence was broken by the slamming of the study door. Serena jumped. Damien stormed in, tie loosened, his brow creased with that familiar scowl. "Where's dinner?" he barked, tossing his briefcase onto the couch. Serena blinked. "The chef is preparing." "You told me you wanted this house to feel like a home," Damien snapped, "and you can't even have dinner ready when I walk in?" Her throat tightened. I'll tell the staff to hurry." He brushed past her like she was air. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just disappointment. She stood frozen, remembering the nights she comforted Arya with false concern. The times she pretended to be shocked at the bruises or the cold remarks. How easily she had masked her glee. And now, that mask was cracking. Later that night, Damien barely touched the food she arranged. "You spent 6 months planning this wedding, but can't figure out how to boil rice," he muttered, stabbing at the dish. "I didn't cook it." "Exactly." The plate clinked sharply as he stood and walked out, leaving her alone at the table. Alone, with her victory. Serena found herself walking to the garden, where the faint scent of lavender still lingered. It reminded her of Arya, the one she once deemed fragile. Weak. A stepping stone to be crushed beneath her stilettos. She sat on the bench, the night wind wrapping around her bare shoulders. For the first time in her life, Serena felt small. And that's when the envelope came. A crisp white letter had been tucked into the folds of her garden shawl. No name. No address. Just a line in elegant ink. "Enjoy the life you stole. You'll find it fits more like a noose than a crown." She stared at it, heart pounding. Was it Arya? She hadn't seen her since the engagement announcement. And yet, the silence spoke louder than any confrontation. Serena's hands trembled as she clutched the note. This was what she fought for. Schemed for. Lied for. Damien's name. The Hayden legacy. The golden cage she now called a home. And for the first time, a bitter truth echoed inside her. Maybe Arya wasn't the fool. Maybe she was just the first to escape. Fractures in the glass. Lucas Hayden had always been a man of logic. A man of science. Trained to read symptoms others overlooked. In medicine, missing a detail could cost a life. In life, it cost clarity. And lately, nothing about Serena added up. He watched her from across the Hayden family ballroom as she smiled for the camera, perfectly poised, perfectly rehearsed. She'd become the face of the Hayden brand after marrying him, proudly displaying their children, speaking at panels, attending galas. But lately, her mask had been slipping. Inconsistencies in her statements. Fabricated anecdotes about her time with the foundation. Boastful claims of initiatives Lucas never signed off on. And then there were the whispers, staff mentioning sharp tones behind closed doors, her obsessive comparisons to someone else. Why does everything suddenly circle back to Arya, he mused, swirling the untouched wine in his glass. He hadn't thought of her in months. Not really. Until tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, the host's voice rang out across the grand hall. Please welcome this evening's surprise speaker, renowned botanical researcher and co-founder of the Terra Nova Healing Project, Dr. Aria Linwood. Silence. Then a collective ripple, like wind through tall grass. Lucas turned sharply. Arya. She walked in slowly, elegantly, dressed in an ink-black velvet gown that hugged her frame without arrogance, only quiet strength. By her side walked a girl in a soft silver dress, Ella. Graceful, delicate, and holding her mother's hand like a small flame against the dark. The same Ella Serena had ridiculed for years. Gasps echoed. Murmurs followed. Is that Arya? She looks different. That's Ella? But wasn't she, slow? Lucas couldn't speak. His eyes locked onto Aria's. Calm. Unbothered. Unrecognizable. But something else flickered in her gaze when she saw him, pity. And perhaps, triumph. Arya took the podium, voice smooth and unwavering. In a world that often deems quietness as weakness, I'd like to introduce someone who redefined everything I thought I knew about strength, my daughter, Aria Linwood. The room went still. Ella stepped up, cheeks flushed but composed. She unrolled a blueprint on the digital screen, an adaptive herb compound system designed to treat neural fatigue in long COVID patients. The design was brilliant. Mathematically sound. Medically revolutionary. Lucas leaned forward, stunned. She designed this? He whispered to the man next to him. Yes, the man replied. She's being recruited by 3 global research institutes already. His heart stuttered. That brainless child was a prodigy. And Serena had called her useless. Suddenly, Lucas remembered a conversation with Serena 2 years ago. She's hopeless, Lucas. Just like her mother. Nothing good will ever come out of that side of the family. A lie. Not just cruel, but calculated. Later, as the gala dwindled, Lucas caught Serena by the arm near the back exit. You told me Ella couldn't do simple math, he said, voice low. Serena froze. And yet I just watched her present a breakthrough theory before a room full of our industry's top minds. Did you lie to me, Serena? Her lips parted, closed. I didn't know she could. He didn't wait for an excuse. I think you knew exactly who they were. You just didn't want the world to see them shine brighter than you. Serena's face paled. And across the room, Arya stood beside her daughter, untouched by drama, surrounded by quiet admiration. She had rewritten her story. She had returned. As Lucas watched Arya leave with Ella, her head held high, a strange ache unfurled in his chest. He didn't just lose a brilliant woman. He had helped silence her. But now, the world was listening again. And for the first time, Lucas wasn't sure which side of the story he had been on all along. The turning tide. Introspection, a man at war with himself. Lucas Hayden sat in his study, the weight of his own choices pressing down on him. He stared at the portrait of Serena hanging on the wall, her smile frozen in a perfect mask. How had I missed it? The question haunted him, echoing through his mind like a broken record. He had seen the cracks in Serena's facade, the lies, the manipulations, but he'd been too caught up in his own ambitions, his own distractions, to listen to the whispers of doubt that had been growing louder. Now, after watching Aria's quiet victory, after seeing Ella's brilliance, Lucas couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. How could I have believed her lies? Serena's cruel dismissal of Arya, her underestimation of Ella's potential, had been driven by her own insecurities. And Lucas had, unwittingly, played a part in supporting that toxic narrative. He had belittled Arya, ignored the signs, and failed to see the woman and daughter he had wronged. Tonight, he had a decision to make. He would reach out to Arya. Apologize. Acknowledge the truth. It wouldn't be enough to fix the past, but perhaps it could be the first step towards something better. Meanwhile, Serena's world was beginning to collapse around her. The gala had barely ended before Serena was confronted by the media. The scandal about her manipulations was already bubbling to the surface, fueled by rumors and her increasingly erratic behavior. A reporter had slipped into her corner as she was leaving the event. Serena, there have been rumors about your involvement in suppressing your stepdaughter's talents. Can you comment on that? The words hit like a slap, and Serena's face drained of color. She stammered, but the damage was already done. I don't know what you mean, she forced out, her voice trembling. Ella is just a child. She doesn't. Her voice faltered as the reporter's camera zoomed in, catching every hesitation. You're the one who called her brainless, aren't you? The reporter pressed. The room fell silent. Serena froze, her composure cracking. The walls she had carefully built to shield her manipulations began to crumble in front of the world. The truth was spilling out. The perfect image she had worked so hard to create, everything she had built on deceit, was falling apart. Later that week, Ella was invited to her very first public interview. It was a momentous occasion for a young girl who had been underestimated her entire life. The media was eager, knowing the attention she would draw after her groundbreaking presentation at the gala. The interview began with the typical questions: the origins of her research, the inspiration behind her ideas, and how she felt about being seen as different. But soon, the questions grew more personal. So, Ella, the interviewer said, leaning forward, your mother has been quite the public figure lately. How do you feel about the way your stepmother treated you? The question hung in the air, a charged silence following it. Ella glanced at her mother, Arya, sitting in the audience, her face calm but watchful. Ella took a deep breath, her hands gripping the edge of the chair. Her voice was steady, but there was a quiet fire in her eyes. I think, she began slowly, that some people don't understand what it means to be different. They want to define you by their own standards. But my mother taught me that what they say doesn't matter. What matters is what we do. The interviewer, clearly surprised by her composure, pressed on, and your stepmother, do you forgive her for what she said about you? Ella looked down at her lap, her fingers nervously twisting a bracelet around her wrist. The question was personal. It wasn't something she had talked about before, but today, in this moment, she felt ready. I think forgiveness is something that takes time, Ella said, her voice quiet but resolute. But I don't hold on to anger. It just makes you heavier than you need to be. She looked up at the camera, a slight smile on her face. I've chosen to rise above it. The words lingered in the air, a quiet strength radiating from her. The audience was stunned into silence before erupting into applause. There was something magnetic about Ella, something that drew people in. Lucas, watching from the wings, couldn't help but feel a rush of pride. He had underestimated her. He had doubted her. And yet, here she was, handling this moment with a maturity and wisdom far beyond her years. I can't believe how wrong I was about her. That evening, Lucas found himself standing at Aria's doorstep, the weight of his words pressing on his chest. He had to make amends. He couldn't let this moment slip away. When Arya opened the door, her expression was guarded. She hadn't expected him. I wanted to apologize, Lucas said, his voice unsteady. For everything. For not believing in you. For supporting Serena when I should have seen the truth. Aria's gaze softened slightly, but she didn't speak immediately. Instead, she looked over at Ella, who was sitting quietly beside her mother. The girl's words from the interview replayed in her mind, I've chosen to rise above it. Arya took a deep breath before responding, her voice steady but filled with emotion. You can't change the past, Lucas. But you can change the way you move forward. And for that to happen, you need to acknowledge what's been done. To me. To Ella. Lucas nodded, understanding the weight of her words. I know, he said quietly. I can't fix everything, but I'm ready to try. He turned to leave, but then paused. For what it's worth, I've seen the truth now. And I'm sorry. As Lucas walked away, he felt a shift, a new beginning, even if it was just a small step. The journey would be long, but it was the right one. As the night wore on, the world outside was shifting. Serena's empire of lies was crumbling, but her own pride kept her from admitting it. But in the quiet of their home, Arya and Ella shared a moment of peace, knowing that the truth was finally out. They had risen above it. And now, the world would have to reckon with their brilliance. Lucas Hayden wasn't the only one to be changed. The entire family would never be the same. The next chapter would reveal whether forgiveness truly could heal the wounds of the past, or whether the scars would remain forever. The edge of ruin. Serena Hayden sat at the vanity, staring into the mirror. Her hands trembled as she brushed through her hair, but the reflection staring back at her was no longer the confident, poised woman she had been. The flawless mask she had carefully cultivated over the years, her charm, her calculated smiles, her meticulous control over every detail, was slipping away, and she could feel it. Her mind raced as she replayed the events of the last few weeks, the media's growing interest in Arya and Ella's success, the mounting pressure on her family's legacy, and most damning of all, Lucas's increasing distance. How did it come to this? Serena had always been in control, always the one pulling the strings behind the scenes. But now, she found herself tangled in a web of her own making, each lie, each betrayal, pulling tighter around her throat. Her thoughts turned bitter as she thought of Lucas. He's starting to see the truth. He's questioning me. The realization hit her like a cold wave. Lucas, her rock, her support, was beginning to see past the illusions she had created. He was looking at her with doubt, with suspicion. The silence of the room felt suffocating. Serena's grip on the brush tightened, her fingers white-knuckled. She wasn't ready to let go of her power. But as her reflection stared back at her, Serena could no longer deny that the walls were crumbling. Everything she had built, all the careful lies and manipulations, were beginning to collapse. And there was no one left to hold the pieces together. Later that evening, Lucas arrived home after yet another meeting, his expression grim. He had just left a conversation with Arya, a long overdue one that had reopened old wounds, but also shed light on truths he had ignored for too long. The truth about Serena's actions, her manipulation of Ella, her control over him, it was all becoming too clear. When he entered the living room, he found Serena sitting by the window, her back to him. The soft glow of the city lights illuminated her features, casting shadows on her face. For a moment, he simply watched her, the woman who had been his partner for so many years, the woman he had trusted above all else. "Serena," he said softly, his voice heavy with an emotion she couldn't quite place. She turned, her smile forced. "Lucas, you're home late. Long day?" Lucas didn't answer immediately. He stepped into the room, his gaze intense. "We need to talk." Serena's heart skipped a beat. She could hear the change in his tone, the lack of warmth. She stood, trying to maintain composure. "What about?" "About you," he said, his words cutting through the air like a blade. "About everything you've done." Serena's stomach twisted. "What do you mean? I don't understand." "You think I don't know?" Lucas's voice rose, the anger and hurt finally breaking through. "I know what you've been doing behind my back. I know about the way you've treated Arya, the way you've manipulated Ella. You've used me, used this family for your own gain, and I let you. I let it happen." Serena recoiled, her breath quickening. She had always been able to maintain control in these situations, but now, facing Lucas's fury, she felt herself unraveling. "You're wrong," she spat. "You don't understand. I did it all for us, for this family." "For what?" Lucas demanded. "For power? For control?" "Serena, I've been a fool." Her lips trembled as she struggled to maintain her composure. "No, Lucas. I did it for you. For us." But the conviction in her voice was hollow. The truth was already out, and no amount of denial would change it. Lucas had already seen through her lies, and no amount of manipulation would fix that. A silence hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Lucas stood, his arms crossed, his gaze steady. He wasn't moving, not this time. Not until she understood. Serena's facade was cracking, and for the first time in years, she didn't know how to hold it together. She was losing everything, the trust of the man she had loved, the respect of the family she had fought so hard to control, and even her own sense of self. "You've been lying to me for so long, haven't you?" Lucas asked, his voice quieter now, as if the anger had drained from him completely. "But this isn't just about the lies, Serena. It's about who you've become." Serena's lips parted, but no words came out. She wanted to shout, to defend herself, to tell him that she had done everything for him, for the family. But deep down, she knew it was too late. "Lucas, please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I never meant to hurt you. I love you." Lucas shook his head, his heart heavy. "It's too late for apologies, Serena. You made your choices, and now we have to live with the consequences." Serena's eyes filled with tears, but they were no longer the tears of a woman in control. They were the tears of someone who had lost everything, who had finally realized that the game was over. "I never wanted this," she murmured, more to herself than to Lucas. "I thought I could fix everything. I thought I could be perfect." Lucas didn't respond. Instead, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving Serena standing there, alone in the dark. Aftermath, a bitter reality. The next day, news broke that the Hayden family's legacy was under scrutiny. Serena's secrets were spilling into the public eye, her manipulations of both Arya and Ella now a matter of record. The media had caught wind of her schemes, and the fallout was swift and unforgiving. Serena sat alone in her study, staring at the pile of letters from the media, from investors, from people she had once controlled. All of them now wanted answers. The walls she had built so carefully, the empire she had crafted, was crumbling before her eyes. Her mind raced as she thought back to the moment when she had first tasted power, when she had first married Lucas, believing she would always be untouchable. Now, she was just another failure, just another woman whose ambition had consumed her. Serena's phone buzzed. It was Lucas. She hesitated, then picked it up. "Serena," Lucas's voice came through, cold and final. "I'm moving forward with the divorce. I can't live in this lie anymore." The words were like ice, each one carving deeper into her soul. She hung up without a word, the silence deafening. In that moment, Serena knew. She had lost everything, her family, her husband, her future. And the worst part was, she had no one to blame but herself. Serena Hayden's empire had fallen, and the woman who had once been untouchable was now nothing more than a shadow of her former self. Her plans had unraveled, her lies exposed, and she was left to face the bitter truth of her choices. But as she sat alone in her study, the walls closing in around her, a part of her still refused to accept defeat. She had been a queen once. And even now, with everything lost, she could feel the faintest stirrings of defiance in her chest. The battle was over, but perhaps, the war was only just beginning. A dying queen's resolve. Serena Hayden sat in the vast, opulent study that had once been the center of her world. The heavy curtains were drawn, but the dim light from the late afternoon filtered through, casting long shadows across the room. The walls, once adorned with reminders of her success, pictures, awards, a display of wealth, now seemed suffocating, pressing in from all sides. The family legacy she had fought so hard to uphold was slipping through her fingers. She could still remember the day she had married Lucas, the day she had first walked into this house with dreams of becoming the undisputed queen of the Hayden family. But as she looked at the empty walls, all she could see were the shattered remnants of her empire. "I'm not done yet." It was a thought she clung to desperately. For years, she had manipulated, controlled, and built alliances to secure her position. She had held the reins tightly, knowing that even the slightest weakness could lead to disaster. But now? Now, she had nothing left. Her betrayal was laid bare for the world to see, and there was no hiding from the consequences. Her grip tightened on the armrest of the chair as she stared at her reflection in the glass of her desk. She had been the one to play the game, the one to set the rules, and now she would play it one last time. The divorce from Lucas was inevitable. The media had turned against her, her public reputation destroyed. But what truly burned her was the way Arya and Ella had risen, how Lucas had started looking at them with admiration, with something she had lost. They had taken everything from me, but I won't go down quietly. Her heart pounded as the plan she had been crafting slowly took shape in her mind. It would be her final chance, a last play for control, a final test of her resolve. A desperate plea. A few days later, Serena's once pristine reputation had been tarnished beyond repair. Every step she took seemed to draw more attention to her unraveling, every word she spoke was met with skepticism, every move scrutinized. The betrayal was too severe. There was no coming back from this. Yet, she refused to accept defeat. She stood in the hallway of the Hayden estate, her hands shaking slightly as she held the phone to her ear. Her voice, though tinged with desperation, remained steady. "Damien," she said, her voice smooth, calculated, "you know what's at stake. You and I, together, we can still take back what's ours." Damien Hayden, her husband's younger brother, had always been a puppet in her hands, but now, with everything slipping away, she needed him more than ever. He had been her ally for years, and she had always known his ambition could match hers. "I'm not sure this is the right time," Damien's voice crackled through the line, sounding reluctant. "Everything's already falling apart. Lucas is, he's not the same. I don't think I can count on him anymore." "Damien," Serena's voice was low, persuasive, "Lucas is weak. He always has been. He's letting Arya and Ella take the spotlight, but you know as well as I do, without me, this family will fall. And without us, he will crumble." There was a long silence. Serena could practically feel the tension on the other end of the line. She knew Damien well enough to understand that he was wavering, teetering on the edge of indecision. "You need to make a choice," she said, her voice sharp now. "If you want to stand by me, if you want to reclaim what is ours, we have one last chance. We'll make sure that Lucas knows exactly what he's losing. And we will take back the Hayden name. Together." The phone clicked in her ear. She could hear Damien's breath on the other end. She had him. She always had. Meanwhile, across town, the consequences of Serena's manipulations were catching up with her, but not in the way she had expected. Arya, once a meek and invisible woman in the shadows of Serena's deceit, was now stepping into the public spotlight with grace and strength. She had been a silent observer for years, watching as Serena crushed her spirit, but in this lifetime, she was ready to rewrite her own story. Ella, now a young woman of sharp intelligence, was preparing for her first public interview. Despite Serena's efforts to stifle her brilliance, Ella's intellect had bloomed into something undeniable. She wasn't the brainless child her mother had once been accused of birthing. "Are you nervous?" Arya asked, her voice calm yet full of pride as she adjusted Ella's suit. Ella looked at her mother, her dark eyes steady. "Not really. I've been preparing for this day my whole life." The interviewer's questions came fast and heavy, and Ella handled each one with a precision that left the audience in awe. But one question in particular caused a stir. "Your mother's past is well known. How do you feel knowing that she is now facing the consequences of her actions?" Ella paused, her fingers tapping the armrest of the chair as she looked directly into the camera. Her voice was steady but full of quiet defiance. "I'm proud of my mother for everything she's done. But my legacy, my path, isn't defined by her. It's mine. And I will make sure the world knows who I am, not who she was. The interviewer sat back, stunned by her words. But it was too late. The clip went viral, sparking both controversy and admiration. The world was beginning to see Ella not as the foolish daughter of a fallen queen, but as a force to be reckoned with. Back at the Hayden estate, Serena's final attempt to reclaim power came crashing down. She had made one last move, one final push to manipulate Damien into supporting her, to take back the family fortune, to rewrite history. But she had underestimated the changes in her family. Damien had walked out of the room with her words hanging in the air. The next day, the media reported that he had made a shocking move. He had publicly supported Lucas's decision to sever ties with Serena. He had even made a statement, declaring his loyalty to his brother, to the family legacy that no longer had a place for Serena. As for Lucas, he made it clear in an interview that he would no longer allow Serena to influence his life or the family business. What she did was unforgivable, he said, his voice firm. But I'm done hiding from the truth. Serena's empire, built on manipulation and deceit, had crumbled in the wake of the revelations about her past actions. The world saw her as she truly was, a woman who had clawed her way to the top, leaving destruction in her wake. Serena sat alone in the cold, empty mansion that had once been her kingdom. The walls that had once been her fortress now felt like a prison, the silence deafening. She had no allies left. No one to turn to. The power she had fought for, the empire she had sought to control, it was all gone. But as the finality of it all set in, a small, bitter smile tugged at her lips. Perhaps, in the end, I was always meant to fall. But I will never forget the taste of power I had, the taste of being untouchable. Serena Hayden was defeated, but in her defeat, there was a strange sense of resolution. She had lost everything, but she had never truly been the queen. And now, as she watched her former life slip through her fingers, she realized the most bitter truth of all: the higher you climb, the farther you fall. A bitter triumph. The house was quiet. The once immaculate hallways, now tainted with the echoes of old betrayals, felt like a mausoleum. Serena Hayden sat alone in the study, staring out of the window. The weight of everything she had lost, the respect, the power, the influence, pressed heavily on her chest. But it wasn't the physical loss that burned the most. It was the betrayal. It was knowing that she had been so close to the top, only to have everything yanked away, piece by piece. The ambition that had driven me, the legacy I built, it was all for nothing. She had sacrificed so much. So many people had fallen at her feet, and she had crushed them beneath her heel, believing that the world owed her. But in the end, it wasn't enough. Her ambition had made her blind to the things that truly mattered: family, love, and loyalty. Her fingers gripped the edge of the desk as she thought back to the day it all started. Her marriage to Lucas had once felt like a victory. Their union had been celebrated as the perfect match, a legacy to carry on the family name. But it had only been the beginning of her downward spiral. It was all a lie. A fantasy. Now, as she sat alone in the ruins of her life, she wondered if any of it had been worth it. She had once been the queen, but the throne was long gone, and so was the kingdom she had built. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts, and she turned slowly, her eyes narrowing. She knew who it was before the door even opened. "Damien," she said flatly, her voice devoid of warmth. "What is it?" Damien Hayden stepped into the room, his face tense, his usually confident demeanor now gone. There was a strange vulnerability in his eyes as he approached her, standing several feet away, as if afraid of getting too close. "I think you know why I'm here," he said, his voice low. Serena didn't respond immediately. She had expected this moment for weeks, the confrontation, the final reckoning. Damien had been a pawn in her game for so long, but now, the tables had turned. Lucas's rejection, the public shunning, and the realization that he had been nothing more than a cog in Serena's machine were starting to weigh heavily on him. Damien shifted uncomfortably. "I can't keep doing this, Serena. I can't stand by you anymore." The words stung, but Serena didn't flinch. She had grown numb to the pain. "You've always been weak," she said coldly. "You've always been a follower, Damien. That's why you're not the one sitting at the top now. You never had the strength to take what you wanted." Damien's face twisted with a mixture of shame and defiance. "I may not have your strength, but I do have integrity. I've been a part of this mess for too long. I can't keep pretending that I'm loyal to you." Serena stood, her chair scraping loudly against the floor as she did. She walked toward him slowly, eyes burning with intensity. "You think you can walk away from me, Damien? From everything we've built together?" Damien's gaze faltered. "I already have. I've told Lucas everything. You won't be able to manipulate him anymore." The finality in his words hit Serena harder than she had expected. Lucas had finally seen through her. He had known all along, deep down. And now, it was too late. The price of betrayal. Lucas Hayden walked into the room a few moments later, his face set in a grim expression. The once proud and powerful patriarch of the Hayden family was now a shadow of his former self, his judgment clouded by the guilt of his own complacency in Serena's schemes. "Serena," Lucas's voice broke through the silence, and she turned to face him, her heart pounding. "Lucas, I didn't," she began, but he held up a hand, silencing her. "I know," he said softly. "I know everything." Serena's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean?" "I know about the lies, the manipulation, the way you played me. You made me believe you were the one, the perfect woman to carry on the family legacy." His voice trembled with emotion, but there was an unmistakable edge of coldness to it. "Lucas, please," she said, stepping forward. "I did it all for us. For our future, for our family." "I know," Lucas interrupted again, his eyes hardening. "But the truth is, you didn't do it for us. You did it for yourself. You didn't care who you hurt along the way. You didn't care that you tore this family apart." Serena felt a wave of nausea flood over her. The room seemed to spin, and for the first time, she realized the full extent of her actions. She had always justified them, telling herself it was for the greater good. But the greater good had been her own, twisted vision. "You have no one left to manipulate, Serena," Lucas continued, his tone steady. "You've lost everything, and now, it's time to face the consequences." Serena's knees nearly buckled beneath her as the finality of his words hit her. The man she had once loved, the man she had fought so hard to control, was standing there, condemning her for the very thing she had always believed was her right. The next few weeks were a blur of media reports and public scrutiny. The Hayden family legacy was tarnished beyond repair, and Serena's role in its destruction was exposed for all to see. No longer was she the proud matriarch of the Hayden family. Now, she was a fallen queen, her name synonymous with betrayal. But the consequences didn't stop there. Serena was no longer welcomed in the circles she had once dominated. Her wealth and influence evaporated as her business partners distanced themselves from her, one by one. Her once gilded life crumbled, leaving her isolated in a house that felt more like a prison than a home. Damien, too, faced the aftermath of his decisions. His relationship with Serena had been severed, and Lucas had cut all ties with him as well. His ambition, once the driving force behind his actions, now felt like a hollow echo. He had burned too many bridges, and the fallout was too great. Ella's triumph, a new era. In the midst of Serena's unraveling, there was a spark of hope. Ella, once the brainless child, had emerged as a brilliant force in her own right. Arya, who had once been overshadowed by Serena's manipulation, now stood proudly beside her daughter, guiding her with the love and wisdom she had always wanted to give her. Ella's latest public appearance was nothing short of revolutionary. She had addressed the media with poise, addressing the controversy surrounding her upbringing, and in doing so, had gained the respect of the very public who had once doubted her. "We are not defined by the mistakes of our past," Ella had said, her words resonating deeply with the audience. "We are not defined by what others think of us. We are defined by our actions, and I will prove that my worth is not in the shadows of those who tried to break me." The media applauded her, and for the first time, Ella was truly seen for the remarkable woman she had become. As Serena stood in the empty, cold study, staring out the window once more, she understood. The punishments had come, the reckoning had arrived, and the final pieces of her empire had fallen away. She had failed. But even in her defeat, there was a sense of strange clarity. The ambition that had once driven her now felt hollow, and as she watched Ella's rise to the forefront of the Hayden legacy, she realized just how far from grace she had fallen. "They will never forget me. Not for my greatness, but for my downfall." Serena Hayden had lost everything, but in that loss, there was a bittersweet peace. And the story, though it had ended for her, had only just begun for others. The end was here for Serena, but for Arya and Ella, a new era was beginning. A new dawn. The house had been sold. The once pristine walls, stained with memories of betrayals, ambitions, and shattered dreams, were now empty, echoing with silence. Aria Linwood stood in the doorway of the home she had once shared with her ex-husband, her gaze lingering on the final remnants of a life she had left behind. Everything had changed. The woman who had once been manipulated, crushed by the weight of lies and deceit, now stood tall, stronger, wiser, and more resolute than ever. The transformation was undeniable. She had not only reclaimed what was hers, but she had rewritten her story, not as a victim, but as a force of nature. Beside her, Ella, her daughter, once seen as the brainless child, now stood as the brilliant, poised heir to the Hayden legacy. The very legacy that Serena had tried so hard to control, to manipulate, had found new life in Ella's hands. Ella, who had once been ignored, underestimated, was now the one leading the charge into the future. Arya glanced down at her daughter, a proud smile tugging at her lips. "You've done it, Ella," she said softly, her voice filled with awe. Ella's eyes shone with a quiet confidence. "We've done it, Mom. We're not just survivors anymore. We're thriving." The legacy of the Hayden family, once tainted by corruption and betrayal, had been cleansed. Arya had taken back her power, and Ella, with her remarkable brilliance, had become the beacon of a new era in the field of medicine. Together, they were unstoppable. The final reckoning, Serena's end. Meanwhile, in the shadows of the life she had once known, Serena Hayden faced the consequences of her actions. No longer the proud matriarch, no longer the woman who commanded respect with a mere glance, she had faded into obscurity. Her last attempt to regain control had been futile, her efforts to manipulate Lucas and Damien falling apart under the weight of their own guilt and shame. Even Damien, who had once been her ally, had turned his back on her. She was alone, utterly and completely alone. Serena had once believed that power was everything. But now, stripped of her wealth, her status, and her influence, she realized too late that it had never been about power at all. She had sacrificed her own humanity for the illusion of control, and in the end, it was not her enemies who had defeated her, but herself. The day Serena disappeared from public life was quiet, almost anticlimactic. There were no grand gestures, no final moments of defiance. She simply vanished, a footnote in the history of the Hayden family. No one spoke of her, and no one would ever remember her the way she had once hoped. A legacy restored. Back in the world that had once been Serena's, the Hayden name was restored, this time, not through manipulation, but through honor, hard work, and the brilliance of those who had always been overshadowed. Ella, now the head of the Hayden Institute, was hailed as a genius in her field. Her research in medicine was revolutionary, and her influence reached far beyond the confines of her family's legacy. Arya stood by her side, a guiding presence, ensuring that the mistakes of the past were never repeated. Lucas Hayden, having seen the truth of his wife's ambition and the consequences of his own blind loyalty, had disappeared from the public eye. He lived a quiet life, far removed from the family's legacy. His days were filled with regret and reflection, but it was too late for redemption. As for Damien, he too had disappeared from the circles that once revered him. He had been a pawn in Serena's game, but in the end, even he had to face the price of his own actions. He lived a life of quiet obscurity, far removed from the bright lights of the Hayden legacy. Aria's reflection, a new beginning. Arya stood on the balcony of the new family estate, the sun setting on the horizon. The past felt distant now, like a story told by someone else. She had risen from the ashes of her betrayal, rebuilt her life, and most importantly, reclaimed her daughter's future. As she watched Ella speak at a medical conference from afar, Arya felt a quiet sense of peace settle over her. This was what she had fought for. Not the power, not the wealth, but the love and respect of her daughter, and the opportunity to build a future that was truly hers. She had learned the hard way that strength didn't come from power or control. It came from within. It came from love, from loyalty, and from knowing when to fight and when to let go. And for the first time in her life, Aria Linwood felt whole. Ella's voice, the future. As the last rays of the sun dipped below the horizon, Ella stepped forward to join her mother. Together, they watched the future unfold before them. There were still challenges to face, battles to fight, but they would face them together. Ella had become a symbol of resilience, a woman who had been underestimated, but who had defied all odds. And with her mother by her side, there was no limit to what they could achieve. "We've come a long way, Mom," Ella said, her voice steady, filled with determination. Arya smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "Yes, we have. And we've only just begun." And as the night sky stretched out before them, Arya knew that the Hayden legacy would live on, but this time, it would be built on the foundations of truth, love, and redemption. End of the story. The darkness of the past had been laid to rest. And in its place, a new light had dawned. A light born from the strength of a mother and daughter who had weathered the storm and come out stronger on the other side. A light that would guide them, and their legacy, into a future where nothing, no betrayal, no manipulation, could ever tear them apart again. The end.